For more than 3 billion years, life on Earth had been small, invisible, single-celled. The planet was alive, but it was quiet. No movement across the seafloor, no bodies drifting through the water, no predators, no prey. Just endless oceans filled with microscopic life, slowly reshaping the planet in ways no one could see. But beneath the surface of those ancient seas, something new was beginning to form. Not a new molecule, not a new chemical reaction. Something far more dramatic: bodies. By around 700 million years ago, Earth had changed enough to allow a completely new kind of life to exist. The air held more oxygen than ever before. The oceans were rich with nutrients. The climate, after long ages of ice and instability, had begun to settle. And life responded. Cells that once lived alone began to cooperate in ways never seen before. They stuck together, they specialized. Some cells focused on movement, others on digestion, others on structure. For the first time, life was no longer just surviving, it was organizing. These early multicellular organisms were not plants. They were not animals as we know them today. They were something in between, and they would change everything. The seafloor of the ancient Earth looked nothing like it does today. There were no fish, no shells, no reefs built by animals. Instead, vast microbial mats covered the bottom of shallow seas like living carpets. Layer upon layer of bacteria, photosynthesizing in the sunlight, slowly releasing oxygen into the water above. And resting on top of these mats were the first large living shapes, flat, soft, strange. Some looked like leaves pressed into the sediment, others like quilted pillows, others like discs or ribbons stretching across the ocean floor. These were the ediacaran organisms, the earliest known animals or animal-like life forms in Earth's history. They did not have bones, they did not have shells, they did not have eyes, teeth, or claws, but they were alive in a new way. They had bodies. For the first time in Earth's history, life could grow large. Some of these organisms reached over a meter in length. They were visible. They cast shadows in the shallow water. This alone marked a revolution. Size mattered. Larger bodies meant access to new resources. It meant protection from environmental changes. It meant control over space. But size also came with problems. A larger body needs more energy. It needs oxygen delivered throughout its tissues. It needs coordination. And to solve those problems, evolution began experimenting. Many of these early animals did not move at all. They absorbed nutrients directly through their bodies, drawing energy from the microbial mats beneath them or from organic material drifting in the water. Others may have slowly glided across the seafloor, leaving faint trails behind them, the earliest evidence of animal movement ever recorded. These trails are still preserved today as fossils, thin lines etched into ancient stone, marking the moment when life first began to explore its environment instead of simply existing within it. Movement changed the rules. A stationary organism lives at the mercy of its surroundings. A moving one can choose where to go. That choice would shape the future of life on Earth. What makes the ediacaran world so strange is that it does not resemble modern ecosystems at all. Most of these organisms had no clear mouths, no obvious digestive systems, no hard parts. Their bodies were soft, flexible, and often symmetrical in unfamiliar ways. Some were built like fractals, repeating patterns branching again and again across their surface. Others were divided into segments, hinting at body plans that would later dominate animal life. But many had no modern descendants. They were evolutionary experiments, bold, temporary solutions to a world still learning how animals should exist. There were no predators yet, no jaws snapping shut, no teeth tearing flesh. Life at this stage was peaceful, slow, and quiet. But that calm would not last. Because once bodies existed, once movement became possible, a new idea was inevitable. What if one organism could feed on another? Even without predators, competition was already beginning. Space on the seafloor was limited. Resources were not infinite. Organisms that could grow faster, spread wider, or absorb nutrients more efficiently had an advantage. Natural selection began pushing bodies toward greater complexity, thicker tissues, better internal transport systems, stronger structural support. Life was preparing itself for something far more intense. Then, around 550 million years ago, the Ediacaran world began to fade. In the fossil record, these strange soft-bodied organisms appear in abundance, and then suddenly decline. Many vanish entirely. Why? The answer is not simple. Some may have been wiped out by environmental changes. Others may have been outcompeted by newer, more efficient animals, and some may have fallen victim to the very innovation they helped create: predation. The rise of animals with mouths, mobility, and the ability to consume others marked the end of the Ediacaran age. The peaceful seafloor was about to become a battlefield. What followed would be the most explosive burst of evolution in Earth's history, a moment when eyes, armor, claws, and jaws appeared in a geological blink, a moment when life didn't just diversify, it erupted. Around 541 million years ago, something happened that had no precedent in Earth's history. Life didn't just change, it exploded. In a span of time so short it barely registers on the geological clock, the oceans filled with creatures unlike anything that had ever existed before. Bodies became harder, shapes became sharper, behavior became aggressive. The Cambrian explosion was not a single event, it was a cascade. And it transformed a quiet world into a living battlefield. Before the Cambrian, most life forms were soft, slow, and fragile. After it, the oceans were filled with armor, weapons, and motion. This shift was driven by a simple but terrifying idea: eating other animals. Once one organism evolved the ability to hunt another, evolution accelerated beyond control. Every advantage mattered. Speed mattered, vision mattered, protection mattered. Life entered an arms race. One of the most important innovations of the Cambrian was the development of hard body parts: shells, spines, plates. For the first time, animals began building external armor made from calcium carbonate and other minerals dissolved in seawater. This armor served one purpose above all else: survival. Predators were emerging, and soft bodies were no longer enough. Among the earliest predators were creatures that barely resemble anything alive today. Anomalocaris was one of the first true hunters in Earth's history. It swam through Cambrian seas with large compound eyes, flexible grasping arms, and a circular mouth lined with sharp plates. It could see prey from a distance, it could grab it, and it could tear it apart. This was new. Never before had life evolved a creature built specifically to kill other animals. Eyes changed everything. Vision allowed animals to detect motion, shape, and distance. It allowed predators to hunt and prey to flee. Once eyes appeared, evolution could no longer remain subtle. Animals had to react faster, move smarter, hide better, and those that failed disappeared. The Cambrian oceans were filled with strange, alien-looking creatures. Trilobites crawled across the seafloor, protected by segmented exoskeletons and equipped with some of the earliest known eyes. Worm-like predators burrowed through sediment, hunting hidden prey. Spiny creatures drifted through the water, their bodies bristling with defenses. Every major animal body plan we recognize today began to take shape during this period. Arthropods, mollusks, early chordates. The foundations of fish, insects, reptiles, mammals, and humans were all being laid here. One of the most important changes was movement. Animals didn't just sit on the seafloor anymore. They swam, they crawled, they burrowed. This movement reshaped the planet itself. Burrowing animals churned sediments, oxygenating the seafloor and changing ocean chemistry. Microbial mats that once dominated the ocean bottom were torn apart. The old world was erased. A new one replaced it. Predation also introduced fear into evolution. Organisms that could sense danger survived longer. Those that reacted faster lived to reproduce. Nervous systems began to grow more complex. Muscles became stronger. Coordination improved. Life was no longer passive. It was alert. Not all Cambrian animals were predators. Many evolved new ways to feed without hunting. Some filtered tiny particles from the water. Others grazed along the seafloor. Some scavenged the remains of kills, but even these animals had to protect themselves. Armor thickened, spikes lengthened, camouflage appeared. Nothing lived without risk anymore. The Cambrian explosion didn't last forever. By around 485 million years ago, the pace of new body plans slowed. The basic blueprint of animal life had been established, but the consequences were permanent. From this point forward, life on Earth would be shaped by interaction between animals, not just chemistry, not just environment, but competition, predation, and survival. For the first time, ecosystems resembled something familiar. Food chains existed, predators hunted prey, animals competed for territory. The oceans were alive with motion, and this was only the beginning. Because once animals mastered the sea, the next challenge awaited: land. After the Cambrian explosions settled, life did not slow down. It stabilized. The chaos of rapid experimentation gave way to refinement. The wild body plans that couldn't survive disappeared, while the successful ones spread across the planet. By around 485 million years ago, Earth entered a new chapter, the Ordovician period, and this was when animals truly took over the oceans. The seas of the Ordovician were crowded. Trilobites multiplied into thousands of species, filling nearly every marine niche imaginable. Some were small and fast, darting across the seafloor. Others were large and heavily armored, slowly crawling through sediment. Brachiopods attached themselves to rocks and filtered food from the water. Crinoids rose from the seafloor like living plants, their feathery arms capturing drifting particles. Early mollusks expanded into new forms, some with coiled shells, others long and straight. The ocean floor transformed into a living landscape. One of the most important developments of this time was the rise of reefs. But these were not coral reefs like today. They were built by sponges, algae, and microbes working together, forming massive limestone structures that stretched for kilometers. These reefs created shelter, protection, and complexity. For animals, reefs were cities. They provided hiding places from predators. They created new feeding opportunities. They allowed species to specialize. Biodiversity skyrocketed. Predators grew larger and more efficient. The straight-shelled nautiloid cephalopods became the top hunters of the Ordovician seas. Some reached lengths of over 5 meters, drifting silently through the water column before striking prey with speed and precision. With grasping tentacles, powerful beaks, and advanced sensory abilities, these cephalopods ruled the oceans for millions of years. For the first time, the planet had true apex predators. As predators became more dangerous, prey adapted, shells thickened, spines grew longer. Some animals evolved the ability to roll up, burrow, or cling tightly to surfaces. Others relied on numbers, reproducing in massive quantities to ensure that at least some offspring survived. Evolution was no longer about novelty, it was about survival. The Ordovician world was also shaped by geography. Most life was concentrated in shallow seas covering large portions of the continents. These warm, sunlit waters were ideal for photosynthesis and supported enormous food webs. But the planet was changing. Continents slowly drifted, ocean currents shifted, climate patterns evolved, and toward the end of the Ordovician, those changes turned deadly. Around 445 million years ago, Earth entered one of its earliest mass extinctions. Temperatures dropped, ice sheets expanded across the southern hemisphere. Sea levels fell dramatically, draining shallow marine habitats. Entire ecosystems collapsed. An estimated 85% of marine species vanished. Trilobites declined sharply. Reef systems were devastated. Many once dominant animals disappeared forever. Life had faced extinction before, but this was different. Animals were now complex, interconnected, and dependent on stable ecosystems. When those systems broke, everything suffered. Yet life endured. As the ice retreated and conditions stabilized, surviving species adapted and spread once again. The extinction acted like a reset button, clearing ecological space for new forms of life to rise. And they would rise stronger than before. The following period, the Silurian, marked recovery. Reefs returned, larger and more complex. Fish diversified and became more prominent. Predators refined their hunting strategies. But the most important changes were happening quietly, near the shore. Plants were beginning to colonize land, and animals were watching. For hundreds of millions of years, life had belonged to the sea. But soon, the surface of the continents would no longer be barren rock. The next great leap was coming. Life was preparing to leave the water. For nearly 4 billion years, the continents were empty. Bare rock, wind, rain, sun. Life existed everywhere except the land. But by around 470 million years ago, that began to change. The first pioneers were not animals, they were plants. Early plants were nothing like the trees and flowers we know today. They had no leaves, no roots, no flowers, and no wood. They were small, low-growing organisms that clung to damp shorelines and riverbanks. They absorbed water directly through their tissues. They reproduced with spores instead of seeds. They relied on moisture to survive. But they did something revolutionary. They transformed rock into soil. As plants spread across land, they broke down stone using chemical reactions and physical pressure. Dead plant material accumulated, forming the first true soils. This soil trapped water. It stabilized the surface. It created new habitats. For the first time, the continents could support complex ecosystems, and animals took notice. The earliest animals to venture onto land were not large. They were small arthropods, related to modern insects, spiders, and crustaceans. Some crawled along damp surfaces, others hid beneath plants and debris. Many still depended on water for parts of their life cycle, but they were no longer fully marine. They had crossed the boundary. These early land animals faced enormous challenges. Gravity was stronger out of water. Air dried out exposed tissues. Oxygen had to be absorbed without gills. To survive, animals evolved new structures, stronger exoskeletons for support, systems to prevent water loss, new ways to breathe air. Every step onto land demanded innovation. Meanwhile, back in the oceans, another transformation was underway. Fish were diversifying rapidly. Jawless fish gave rise to jawed predators, whose powerful bites allowed them to dominate aquatic ecosystems. Armor protected some species, while others relied on speed and agility. Fins became more flexible and muscular. These fish were not just swimming, they were experimenting. Some fish began living in shallow, oxygen-poor waters where gills alone were not enough. To survive, they evolved the ability to gulp air. Simple lungs appeared. At first, these lungs were just backup systems, but they would become something far more important. On land, plants grew taller. Vascular tissues evolved, allowing plants to transport water and nutrients internally. This enabled them to rise above the ground, capturing more sunlight. The first forests formed, and with them came new opportunities. Animals followed plants inland, feeding on spores, decaying matter, and each other. The land was no longer empty. By the end of the Silurian and into the Devonian, Earth had two active worlds. The seas, filled with complex food webs and powerful predators. The land, newly alive, expanding rapidly with plants and small animals. But these two worlds were about to collide, because some fish were preparing to do something extraordinary. They were preparing to walk. The Devonian period is often called the Age of Fish, but that name doesn't tell the whole story, because during this time, fish did something no animal had ever done before. They left the water for good. Devonian seas were crowded and competitive. Predators grew larger and more efficient, and shallow waters became dangerous places to live. At the same time, climate shifts caused frequent droughts. Ponds dried up, rivers shrank, oxygen levels in warm, stagnant water dropped. Fish that could tolerate these conditions survived, and some went further. Lobe-finned fish evolved strong, muscular fins supported by bone. These fins were not just for swimming. They could push against the bottom, prop up the body, and move through dense vegetation. Inside these fish were lungs, allowing them to breathe air when water oxygen was low. They were not trying to conquer land. They were trying to survive. Some of these fish began using their fins to haul themselves across mudflats between shrinking pools of water. At first, this movement was clumsy and temporary, but over generations it improved. Bones strengthened, fins broadened, necks became more flexible. The line between fish and land animal began to blur. Creatures like Tiktaalik represent this transition. They had scales and fins, but also wrists, elbows, and a flat head suited for shallow water. They could support their weight. They could lift their heads. They could breathe air. They were no longer confined to the water. As these early tetrapods ventured onto land, they encountered a world rich with opportunity. There were plants everywhere. Insects and arthropods had already spread across the land. Food was abundant, and there were no large land predators at first. Life on land demanded radical changes. Limbs replaced fins. Stronger spines supported the body. New sensory systems adapted to air instead of water. Reproduction remained tied to water, but mobility expanded. Animals could explore forests, riverbanks, and floodplains. The age of land vertebrates had begun. Meanwhile, plants continued to reshape the planet. Trees grew taller. Roots penetrated deeper into the soil. Forests spread across continents. This changed weather patterns, stabilized climates, and increased oxygen levels. Earth was becoming a world that could support large animals. But growth came at a cost. Plants removed carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, cooling the planet. Weather became more extreme. Habitats shifted rapidly. Toward the end of the Devonian, these changes triggered another mass extinction. Many marine species disappeared. Reefs collapsed. Some early land animals vanished. Once again, life was tested. Yet those that survived carried something new with them. Limbs, lungs, the ability to live outside the sea. The door to land had been opened, and what would step through next would redefine the planet. By the time the Carboniferous period began, Earth no longer felt like an alien planet. It felt alive. Vast forests covered the continents, stretching across floodplains and river deltas. Towering trees rose tens of meters into the air, their trunks thick and rigid, their leaves forming dense canopies that blocked out sunlight below. The land was no longer a frontier. It was an ecosystem. These forests were unlike anything alive today. Most trees did not produce seeds. They reproduced using spores, releasing them in enormous clouds that drifted through the air. Swamps dominated the landscape. Dead plant material accumulated faster than it could decay, sinking into waterlogged ground. Over millions of years, this plant matter would be buried, compressed, and transformed. It would become coal. The Carboniferous atmosphere was rich in oxygen, far richer than today. Oxygen levels may have reached over 30%, compared to about 21% now. This had dramatic consequences. Fire burned hotter. Animals grew larger. Insects reached impossible sizes. Dragonfly-like insects with wingspans over half a meter ruled the skies. Millipedes grew longer than cars. Spiders and scorpions reached sizes that would seem monstrous today. These animals did not need lungs like mammals. Their bodies absorbed oxygen directly from the air, and the oxygen-rich atmosphere allowed them to grow far larger than modern insects ever could. On the forest floor, early amphibians thrived. They hunted insects, crawled through vegetation, and laid their eggs in water. But amphibians were still limited. Their eggs dried out easily. Their skin lost moisture quickly. They could not stray far from wetlands. To fully conquer land, animals needed one more innovation. That innovation was the amniotic egg, a self-contained life support system that protected the embryo, prevented dehydration, and allowed reproduction away from water. This egg changed everything. Animals that possessed it no longer depended on swamps and rivers to reproduce. They could live anywhere. These animals were the first true reptiles, small, agile, and well-adapted to dry environments. They spread rapidly across the continents. Their skin reduced water loss. Their limbs supported efficient movement. Their eggs freed them from water. For the first time, vertebrates were fully terrestrial. As reptiles diversified, food webs grew more complex. Predators emerged on land. Prey adapted to escape them. Behavior became more sophisticated. The quiet forests of the early Carboniferous gave way to a dynamic, competitive world. But once again, the planet shifted. Toward the end of the Carboniferous, climates became drier, swamps shrank, forests fragmented, many giant insects disappeared. As oxygen levels declined, Amphibians struggled. Only the most adaptable reptiles survived. This transition marked the beginning of a new era, an era defined not by water or forests, but by survival in harsh, changing environments. The world was preparing for dominance by reptiles, and soon they would rule the planet.